Welcome to Inside Scoop Live, the podcast where indie authors get personal, sharing insights about their books, their writing journeys, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt, and I invite you to join me for engaging conversations with both debut indie authors and seasoned veterans. Whether you're looking for your next great read or a bit of inspiration, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Elaine Ricker Kelly is here today to talk about her latest novel, Finding Her Voice. It's a story of two women daring to raise their voices in a world that wants them silent as they stand up for their faith, their beliefs, and their right to be heard. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Elaine Ricker Kelly is an award-winning author writing about women in the Bible and the early church. As a mother of 3 daughters, Elaine knew the harm of being considered secondary. She thought fiction would help others to see how Jesus equipped women as disciples and empowered women to speak and lead. Her research-based approach and empathetic tone were developed during 30 years as a financial advisor. Since Jesus engaged women as financial advisors, Kelly felt betrayed as a Christian when she saw the church speaking against women leaders, and she felt it was important to show how the Bible empowers women and endorses equality for all. She hopes to bring healing and hope to those sidelined or silenced by the church by writing blogs on biblical equality, church history, and affirming LGBTQ+ people. She and her husband live near Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and worship in the mainline Protestant Christian tradition. They have 3 adult daughters and enjoy hiking, nature, tennis, pickleball, music, history, and travel. And you can learn more about Elaine Ricker Kelly and her work at elainekelly.ca. Well, hi, Elaine. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Hi, Sherry. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to learning more about you and your book, of course. To get us started, why don't you give us an overview of what Finding Her Voice is about? And then perhaps you could share what inspired you to tell the story of early female apostles.
Well, that's just it. It is a story of early female apostles. And I guess some people don't realize that there were women who were apostles and evangelists who went traveling around talking about Jesus in the first century. And so I just wanted to put a spotlight on all the women who were speakers and leaders and preachers at that time. And Junia is one who's in the Bible. And so this is a bit of a backstory on her fictional first mission journey. And the other main character is Susannah, who's mentioned as a disciple and patron of Jesus. But later, I imagine that she marries Philip the evangelist, whose wife is never mentioned in the book of Acts.
As the third book in your trilogy, From Broken to Bold, how does this final installment bring the series full circle?
So, in my first novel, I show the women who were following Jesus. There were many disciples and patrons, women that followed Jesus to take care of his needs. I feature Mary of Clopas, whom I call Mara, and she is overcoming abuse or trauma. And so it's a story of her personal character development where she learns to have some self esteem and self confidence. And she also comes to accept her son's orientation. And so that comes through in the third novel, where she has taught her daughter how to use her voice. And then the other main character in the first novel is Joanna, the disciple and patron of Jesus. And I go with the tradition that Joanna is actually the same person as Junia. It's just the Hebrew and the Roman version of her name. And Junia is mentioned as an outstanding apostle in the book of Romans.
Tell us a little more about Junia and Susannah, because they both sound like extraordinary women. What do you admire most about their strength and conviction?
So, with both of my characters, I wanted to make them strong female characters. They face difficulty, they face opposition. The world wants them to be silent. Early male apostles don't really understand how come Jesus equipped these women to be speakers. They don't really understand how a woman could be teaching or leading. So it takes some time for the early church to accept that that's what Jesus taught. And Peter is actually one of the first who says, no, anybody can be filled with the Spirit. And his wife travels with him as an apostle. And so, what's special to me about Junia and Susannah is that they face opposition. They're told to be silent. It would be easy for them to be silent, but they try to find various ways to make their voices heard and to deliver the message that God has given them to deliver.
It's so funny. Like now I feel like women, we take our voices for granted, but it was a totally different world. So it's interesting to look back historically on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if other people remember when women were only supposed to be in the newspaper at birth, marriage, and death. So they weren't supposed to have a public profile.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's not that long ago that women were to be silent. Even as children, you're seen and not heard. And even this week, I heard people advocating against women having the vote, which is one way of having a voice because they figured the husband or the father could have that vote for the household and the women didn't need to speak. I think it's very relevant today.
It is very relevant today, and it's scary, this trend that seems to be happening about going backwards, you know?
Yeah, so I was wondering about that. I worked as a financial advisor, professional financial investment and insurance advisor for 30 years. I didn't notice that this trend was going backwards in terms of feminism or women's equality. And then I started to peel back, why is this happening? And then I felt this sense of betrayal because I'm a Christian and I discovered that it's coming from Christianity. The movement against women's equality is actually stemming from my own religion.
Mm,
I felt a sense of betrayal because that's not the Christianity that I knew or grew up with. All I want to say is that if you are a Christian, the Bible does speak for women and men to have equality in serving God.
right. Tell us a little bit about Junia's arrangement with her grandfather. It's heartbreaking. What does her story say about the sacrifices women were forced to make for faith and family?
As you probably know, a lot of the martyrs in the early church were women. There was no sexism, and who was accused and put in prison for being a martyr for Christ. So obviously, the secular world felt that the women and men were both speaking and were both a threat to the traditional ways. And so, in that time, in the first century, Christianity was very small. It was considered a rebel sect against a part of Judaism that was rebelling against the traditional Judaic law.
Mm,
And so I have imagined that Junia's grandfather is Theophilus, who is the person that Luke addresses his gospel and the book of Acts to, is my dear Theophilus. And so the idea is that Theophilus actually in history became the high priest. He supported Judaism in the traditional way. He supported the Sanhedrin's execution of Jesus. And so, of course, he wouldn't want his own family to be believing or preaching about Jesus. And
right.
so it would have been dangerous for any woman to go against her father, husband, or male guardian in that time to believe in Jesus.
Right, right. Wow. A little bit about Susannah. She faces fears about motherhood and purpose. How did you craft her struggle to balance personal desires with her spiritual calling?
Yeah, so I find this such an interesting question because the assumption is that her personal desires are not in line with her spiritual calling. In other words, that her personal desires are selfish or evil, and spiritual calling is good, and they can't be both
Mm,
combined. But my view is that Susanna's personal desires are exactly in line with her spiritual calling. She sincerely and deeply wants to fulfill her spiritual calling. So the underlying assumption comes from way back in Adam and Eve, and our society sees Eve's desire as impure, wanting to usurp Adam's power. But that's a societal interpretation that has really permeated into portraying women as having evil desires. But Eve actually had a good desire for knowledge, and Adam wanted to rule over her. So in my novel, I show that contrast between good and evil with people accusing the women of vanity, conceit, self importance, spreading gossip and hearsay and false teaching, and having an evil desire to rule, saying that their desire to rule is evil. But they actually don't desire to rule. They simply want to fulfill their calling to preach the word that Jesus has given to them. And so their personal desire is in line with their spiritual calling, but that is juxtaposed against the desires of the patriarchal society.
yeah. Oh, wow. I walked right into that one too. It shows how we've been kind of programmed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think unconsciously we just assume that our personal desires are selfish and evil and bad. And some churches have actually taught that your intuition is bad.
Yeah, yeah. When in fact, I mean, Susanna's personal desires were the same as her spiritual calling. I mean, it was this basically. Yeah.
That's right. Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow. I can't believe I did that.
It's
um,
natural, no worries. It's actually
yeah. Yeah.
perfect because that's exactly what society does. They separate the woman's desire from what's good in following God's call.
Your characters challenge deep rooted gender expectations within their faith. How did you portray those tensions while keeping their humanity at the center of the story?
So I think what shows their humanity is their flaws. I did not make Susanna or Junia to be perfect. They are different at the end of the novel than they are at the beginning of the novel. They go through a learning process. They didn't know how to speak or lead. They didn't know how to raise their voice. Susanna doesn't know how to speak when she's actually confined to the house during pregnancy and nursing. And Junia was told not to speak. When she finally gets a chance, she puts her foot in it, so to speak. She makes mistakes that she later regrets. And I learned a lot about her on her first missionary journey. The tradition of the church is that she and Andronicus smashed idols and destroyed pagan temples. But from a 2025 perspective, that's pretty disrespectful to destroy the things that other cultures consider holy. So
Mm,
I have Junia going through a learning process and thinking, okay, men may admire you for getting converts, but that's not what Jesus did. Jesus didn't destroy their beliefs, Jesus showed love. So she goes through a learning process there.
yeah, yeah. I want to talk about the world building you did. The ancient world feels so vivid on the page. What details or moments you think make that era feel the most real for readers?
Yeah, I think what makes it real is the historical information. So, a lot of people are a little bit familiar with the biblical story, but I put the biblical story inside the historical context. And I learned a lot about that. I mean, why did Emperor Claudius expel all the Jews from Rome, for example? Why did the Philo, the philosopher and diplomat, come from Alexandria to Rome and complain about the Greeks persecuting the Jews? Why were there street riots in Rome? Why did Pilate allow the Jews to attack the Samaritans in Samaria? There's Roman soldiers that disrespect the temple and cause a stampede. All of these true historic events, I think, are what allow us to see that that era is very real.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there something about life in that era that surprised you or ended up changing how you portrayed your characters? Or was it pretty spot on with what you knew and anticipated?
Well, I did set out, as I said from the outset, to shine the spotlight on women in the Bible and women in the early church. I did not expect to become an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. I didn't set out with that goal. But
Oh,
as I was setting the novel, my second novel was set in the book of Acts, where the Holy Spirit directs Philip to baptize a person who's neither male nor female. And then the Spirit lands on everyone that Peter speaks to at the Roman centurion's home. And there were same sex pairings within the Roman military. So I portray these characters in my second novel and have them baptized as equals in the early church. And then in the third novel, what happened was I had portrayed Mariamne, the sister of Philip, as being betrothed to Nathaniel, because in the non biblical book called the Acts of Philip, she goes and travels as an apostle.
mm,
So she left quite early on, and she wasn't in my second novel at all. But in this third novel, Junia's mission trip goes to the town where Mariamne and her brother and Nathaniel are teaching and evangelizing. And as I researched more about what Mariamne did, it turns out she not only vowed virginity, she cut her hair, she wore pants, she had all the same responsibilities as the male apostles in that town. It was Hierapolis. So it turns out that in a very early manuscript of the Acts of Philip, they actually said that, a woman could not be an apostle. Therefore, you need to become a male to become an apostle. And we can see that you have the soul of a man. So you just need to shed your femininity and then you can be an apostle. And in today's language, it sounds a lot like gender dysphoria or being asexual. So I was surprised, but I did portray Mariamne the way I saw her in the historical documents. And since then, I found many women in history who changed or posed as men. There was, of course, Joan of Arc, who dressed as a man in the French military. Mulan, the Disney show from China. Yentl, a story of a Jewish woman in Poland who dressed as
Hmm.
a boy to go to school. And in Afghanistan, they have the bacha posh tradition where women or girls can dress as boys until they hit puberty. So I was very interested to hear about and to think about this tradition of girls who are being prevented from doing things, changing their appearance to be boys. Even as recent as the 1967 Boston Marathon, a woman who wanted to run had to enter the race as a man in order to run the Boston Marathon.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting, and I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but I'm getting that many people have not heard of that side of the stories in the Bible. At least it doesn't seem to be focused
Yeah,
on,
well, I mean,
you know.
Marianne needs to be clear. She's not named in the Bible. She's named in books that are not in the Bible.
Mm,
But there were many women who are not named in the Bible. I mean, we don't have most of the men, the male apostles, we don't have their stories from the Bible. We have their stories from other traditions or non
right.
biblical sources. But Mariamne's not in the Bible. Her story was excluded from the Bible in the early times.
Okay. I love how these women who had something to say or to contribute or, wanted more did whatever it took to get their voice out there.
Yeah, and it wasn't that Junia wanted to speak just because she wanted to be the star and be the speaker. No, that wasn't it at all. I have a backstory of Junia where she's part Greek and part Jew, and so she's biracial. Her son is biracial. They cannot have Holy Communion with the Jewish Christians because
Mm,
they're Greek. And so, if the Jews follow their law about not eating with Greeks, then the Christians of both ethnicities cannot have Holy Communion together. They can't eat together. So, she's very motivated to get that message out to break the divisions between races.
Many readers find the echoes of modern issues in your book, and we talked a little bit about that. How do you feel those ancient struggles reflect the challenges women face today?
What I was surprised at is that we are still struggling with some of the same issues as we were at that time. And so, things that women have discussed today, because we're free to talk about these things today, you'll see them in this first century fiction. But I think they fit. I don't think that they're misfits in that society to have a person from the crowd say, "Hey, get your wife under control," or "Hey, you'd look better if you'd smile more," or
Mm,
that woman is only giving hearsay. A woman's testimony is not reliable. Why is this woman speaking? Why are women even allowed at this meeting? These are the kinds of things that I think could have been said in the first century, and I still hear today.
mm-hmm, for sure. Wow. The emotional impact of the novel runs deep. Was there a particular moment that moved you most while writing it?
Well, even today, when I'm talking to my daughter about this book, I got choked up because Susannah is dealing with, well, not really infertility. I had infertility myself for a number of years and then a miscarriage. But with Susanna, Susanna has daughters. And in that time, if you don't have a baby boy, that is grounds for divorce. And so
Mm,
you are considered infertile if you don't have sons. I mean, you saw this with King Henry VIII. He divorced his first wife because she didn't have an heir, but she did have a daughter who later became Queen Mary the First. But King Henry VIII divorced her because she didn't give birth to a boy. So Susanna is ridiculed by her friends. They say maybe she's holding a sin, a bitter root of unforgiveness. God is punishing her by giving her girls only. She's feeling miserable because even when Philip tries to comfort her, she feels like she hasn't done her job by giving birth to a boy. And what is her value and what is her self-worth, because it's women's worth is being wound up in giving birth to a boy.
yeah.
And this is coming straight from history. One of the characters, I have that him paraphrasing what Martin Luther says, which is basically that if women bear themselves weary or ultimately bear themselves out, that doesn't hurt, for that is the purpose for which they exist. And today's ear, it doesn't sound very good. At the time, Luther was trying to comfort the woman who actually might have died in childbirth and trying to say, well, that's okay. At least you've done a good thing here by giving birth. But Even before Luther in the 1500s, we have Augustine, who said the only reason he could think of for a woman to be made as man's helper was to help men procreate. So, this kind of idea is deep in the roots of Christianity. And I just wanted my reader to hear what Susannah hears from one of her friends, which is, you are more than a woman breast, you are a person.
It's so funny how women are always blamed for not having males, and it takes two to tango, right?
Yeah, actually, it is the male chromosomes that determine the gender of the baby.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah.
The title, Finding Her Voice, feels symbolic on many levels. What does voice represent to you personally?
Yeah. So for me, I think this novel is my voice speaking out into the void to say, hey, Christians, the Bible doesn't endorse putting women in a secondary role. The Bible endorses freedom and equality for all, regardless of sex or race or orientation. So I feel that this novel is a chance for me to use my voice. In researching it, I found both men and women who have been silenced and sidelined by questioning traditional beliefs. I found a number of Bible commentaries, sermons, and stories about women through history that have done preaching, but their writings are largely ignored. They're not shared or taught in many theological schools. So the things that I've heard today silence women from preaching are the same things that Junia and Susannah might have heard.
Mm,
So for me, I had a career in business, and I thought, oh, who am I to write a book about women in the Bible? I don't have a social media platform. I don't have credibility with a theology degree. I don't have a creative writing degree. So, who am I to talk about religious topics? And yet, I didn't even know these things were controversial, but I think God knew they were controversial. And I think
mm.
being unqualified meant that I was less reliant on myself and more open to God's leading. Because now I've learned that some people who go to theological school start out thinking that women and men are equal in ministry and come out of theological school thinking women must be subordinate. So I relied on a lot of self study. I read up on scholarship. I looked and listened and read, and I followed what it looked like the Bible says, which is when you take it away from the traditions of the church, it's very much a document that frees women and men and all people to be who God created them to be.
Yeah,
So I feel like I've stopped hiding and I've used and found my voice.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Your stories are authentic. You don't have this preconceived notion about how things would be. You were more open to what you were going to discover on this journey. Yeah.
Yeah. And I learned so many new things. I love discovering new things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know your stories will certainly spark a lot of conversations. What kind of conversations do you hope your books will inspire?
Well, I mean, the conversation about equality and faith and identity, those are kind of the main themes. The New Testament, Paul talks about no more Jew or Greek, citizen or slave, male and female, citizen or foreigner. And a lot of us are confused about what that exactly means. And I think that it's worth talking about it. To me, of course, it means more than just anyone can become a Christian. I think that it means in Christ those differences exist, but those differences don't have an impact on your role or your function or your calling or your abilities. So it's more than just everyone's welcome to come to the table, it's that everyone's allowed to speak at the table.
Mm, right, right. Have you heard from readers any kind of reactions or insights that reminded you why these stories are so important?
Well, I think right now our world is very divided, and we've seen increased division as people get social media that promotes views that they've liked and engaged with before. So it's hard for people to see and understand opposing views. But women have had a function and preached in Christian settings in the mid 1900s. We said before that had seemed to be moved backwards. So I think the sexism and the racism were very big in the civil rights movement in the 60s. But even now, we've seen trouble with Blacks and the police, for example.
Yeah.
There's been persecution of Jews in their worship spaces and persecutions of gays and not having the legal rights, the secular legal rights of a marriage. So, what I hope is that my story can show Christianity as something that can break that divide. In Ephesians, Paul talks about Christ breaking the walls of division between us, and that we can be more loving, more inclusive, and more Christ like.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. We need to get that message out there more.
Well, I need to thank Reader Views for its review because actually your company reviewed something that said exactly that about how the past and the present are echoed. Despite experiencing oppression and discrimination in a time so far gone, it's easy to compare the trials with these women, people of color, and the LGBTQ plus community, and anyone who does not fit the ideal lofted by those in power today. Junia and Susannah's world is being ripped apart by divisions, just as we are seeing in our own communities and nations ripped apart by divisions.
So, how do you feel now that the trilogy's over? What are you feeling? Are you going to miss these characters?
Yeah, it has been a huge effort and quite a lot of research and editing to go through these books. So I am planning on writing an interactive devotional to address some of the questions or to allow readers to discuss together or reflect on the feminist and gay affirming ways of seeing the Bible. But
Oh.
right now, I'm having a lot of fun creating short reels for TikTok and YouTube. And I am also sharing some of my research on my articles on my blog on my website.
Okay, nice. So, more promotion for now before getting into anything new.
I'm
Yeah.
probably going to be working on the devotional in the new year, a devotional on the Gospels for
Okay.
people who have deconstructed and they're afraid that Christianity is not for them. And maybe they can revisit the Gospels and see who Jesus is and encounter a Jesus who is loving and inclusive and welcoming to them that can give them freedom.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Elaine, is there anything else you wanted to share with us today?
I just wanted to thank you so much for having me on the show. I was very excited. This morning, actually, we got the news that my book, Finding Her Voice Acts of Early Female Apostles, hit #1 on the bestseller list on Amazon.
Oh, congratulations. Wow,
Yeah,
that's
for the
huge.
categories that it's in. So I'm very excited this morning about that news.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah. And thank you for joining me on the show. And I appreciate getting to learn more about you and your book. And I love the work you're doing. So thank you very much.
I just really appreciate you allowing me this chance. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Elaine Ricker Kelly, author of Finding Her Voice. You can learn more about Elaine Ricker Kelly and her work at elainekelly.ca. And be sure to follow our other interviews on InsideScoopLive.com.